Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jillian Walker, VP of Research at Everest Group, and I'm here with my colleague, Research Director Isaac Premsingh, and our guest, Dr. Ken Savin, today. And as we're waiting for folks to join, why don't those who are already here let us know where you're joining in from? And we'll give it a second here as people filter in. Okay, so as that's happening, let's go ahead and get going. As a quick note for our audience, we do invite you to scan the QR code at the right of your screen if you would like to have a conversation with those on our team covering today's topic. And today we are talking about a shift that's getting a lot of attention right now, and that is the move from space as exploration to space as an economy. So for a long time, space development, if you will, was mostly government-led and very much mission-driven. What we're seeing that is changing now is that infrastructure around space as an economically viable area of business is beginning to grow. Space is being perceived more as a business opportunity, something that companies can actually use, that they can build on, that they can really make money from. And we'll talk about that today from a few different angles, from launch and ecosystem build out to what's actually happening in orbit. And one of the interesting areas of overlap across all of this is in the biotech pharma space, because it is one of the first places, I think, where you can clearly see how access to space is translating into something that is commercially meaningful. To that end, again, we're really glad to have with us Dr. Ken Savin, Chief Scientific Officer at BioOrbit, which is a space-enabled biotech pharma company working at the intersection of microgravity science and real-world therapeutics. Ken, it's really great to have you here. Maybe just to ground the conversation, can you give us a quick overview of yourself and what BioOrbit does, the problem that you're solving with microgravity, and maybe how you fit within both the broader biotech, pharma, and space economy landscapes?
Okay, so first of all, I'm a chemist by training. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for about 20 years and got a call from somebody offering for me to do research on the International Space Station. And I took them up on it with a bunch of my friends at work. And we ended up flying 5 separate experiments to station and thought it was great. It was a great experience. It was good for our company. And when I retired from that job, I ended up going to work for the people who had called me up to do work in space. They wanted to see if I could find other people like myself who would do the same. So I did that for a number of years, but I really wanted to do things. They're more of an advocate for doing things and a facilitator. They don't actually do the work. And I got a call from a company that actually does the work in space, and I ended up joining them and spent 4 years at a company called Redwire as their chief scientist. And at the beginning of this year, I left Redwire and went to work for BioOrbit. And BioOrbit is a much more focused company. Their focus is on using a unique piece of hardware that they have developed, and in some cases using space to develop crystals and particles for pharmaceutical products that give an advantage in both physical properties and ultimately in its ability to be applied and used as a therapeutic.
Thank you for that. So I'm just jumping into some key questions here around this topic. It's kind of starting at the top. We talk a lot about this shift from exploration to economy. But that can, I think, still feel a bit abstract until you look at what's actually changed or been changing over the last few years. On the one hand, access to orbit has become much more routine. So, for example, we're seeing hundreds of launches a year now, thousands, of course, of satellites that are going up. Most of those are commercial. And I think that would have been hard to imagine even a decade ago. And then, of course, there's launch systems that are being reused at scale, which means missions are becoming more scheduled, more predictable. So, as we look at space, it's becoming a lot less about just getting there and more about what happens once you are there. And to me, that's really when we start seeing the seeds of an economy being planted. And then there's the capital flow, so government backing, uptake in private investment, especially when we see real strong commercial use cases like you've articulated. So Ken, I'm wondering from your perspective, when did you personally realize space was becoming a place to build a business rather than just run experiments? Was there a moment at all where this shifted from kind of interesting science to something that looked like a more viable environment?
So in some ways, I'm not a good person to judge that because I'm not always quick on the uptake for things like that. But I did start to see within working for the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space, those are the people I went to work for after I left the pharmaceutical industry. And their job was to facilitate people doing science in space. And what I started to see was that more and more of the efforts that were being executed in space were being done by private enterprise trying to come up with some new interesting technology. And people at NASA were starting to take note and really starting to push for it. And I think for me, the moment where it really became a reality was during a meeting where the results of one particular experiment were being presented to us. Merck had run an experiment where they flew one of their products, Keytruda, to orbit in the hopes that they would be able to generate a new crystal form. Keytruda that is delivered currently via IV on the ground has a broad, a disparate size set for the different particles that are in there. And that gives it certain properties that may be advantageous, but it hurt its ability to be delivered in a very concentrated single dose. So you had to go for a broader, bigger dose via IV injection. And what they noticed from their studies in space were that they got a much more narrow band size distribution, and the particles were all the same shape in addition to being the same size, pretty close. And that led them on to new work, which ultimately led them to a new version of Keytruda, which is being launched this year, which provides them a different application. You can use it as a subcutaneous dosing mechanism, which is ultimately more convenient for the patient and has real value, financial value to the company. And it can be patented, so it extends the life of that product. But when I saw that, I was like, that's not just a problem they have. That's a problem across the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. And if you could address that, that is worth real money to a very big and a prosperous industry. So that's when I was like, okay, this is real. And if you think about it in the right way, it could be made logistically and financially reasonable.
And
I mean, that's the key to it.
Yeah, and just kind of building on that, I'm wondering, have you seen other things that have fundamentally changed? I think, especially in the last 5 or so years, that really make this phrase space economy more credible now?
Yeah, so I think you touched on a few of the points around just the logistics, right? The SpaceX alone is going to launch over 100 flights this year. And for us, the space station, there's probably 7 launches that are happening this year and next year. And so with that, access has become a lot more routine. You don't hear about things failing in the same way that you did early on. In addition, even though the price is not necessarily coming down yet, the reliability is really meaningful to an industry that is going to have to depend upon it, whatever industry that is. You also mentioned the funding. There's a lot of funding, both government and non-governmental. And people are starting to be serious about placing bets on certain areas that they believe can pay off. And I think all of that added together is making it a real economy. The last thing, and it's kind of an oddity looking back at it now, but I'm not a NASA person. I didn't come from NASA, right? They were a different group of people, and that was a dream that a scientist would have to go work for them. But normal people like myself are flying experiments to space and doing it routinely. So it's been kind of democratized. And I think the one piece that's missing is a lot of people just don't know about it. That's the real thing, right? So more and more, it's becoming kind of an everyday thing. And in some ways, the fact that it's hidden is a tribute to just how good it is, that you just don't hear about it. It's just happening and no fanfare.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you brought that point up too, because, I think even though there's a kind of quietness to it, I think in some circles there is a bit of hype around it. And so getting to that technical or commercial truth becomes really important, if you will. What do you think that people who are very much interested in this area are still getting wrong? Are they overestimating, let's say, the speed of commercialization, or do they underestimate how far it has already come? What would you say about the reality on the ground, and maybe even how long it will take for this particular area to really scale?
So there are some things that I think people who do know about the situation are getting right, and are holding them back. And it's things like the fact that shifts in government support are are happening, and they're hard to predict, and people don't like to go into situations that they have trouble predicting, or don't have control over. I think also just thinking about getting things to space is kind of a crazy thought for a lot of people. It's like not the normal thing that you would expect to do. And it does take a long time to have an idea, develop it into a flight experiment, fly it, get your results back, and make some determination on did it work or not, or what you need to do next. So those are kind of the negatives that people know and hold us back. On the other side, though, the fact that things are happening very quickly and reliably leads us down this path where if you are willing to invest the time and you do it in the right way, although it takes longer to get things set up and to move it to that point, the results, I think, are bigger than what people expect. And if you're good at this and you're able to do iterative studies over and over again, you'll get results that come back faster than you thought. So that's the whole thing. It's slow uptake, but once you're into it, you can get really good results that are extremely impactful. Things that we've demonstrated, shown to experts, and they just looked at and said, it's not the same. It's not the same as what we see on Earth. And that's what you're really looking for, being able to do things you can't do on Earth. If you can do it on Earth, there's just no reason to go to space.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good summary of why we need to go to space, right, Ken? We really want to produce or manufacture products that have some differentiated capabilities. And one of the areas, we just look at space as a frontier for innovation. Over the years, many agencies across the world have always, focused on how to reach there. And as Jillian pointed out, we've, gone beyond that now. So beyond rockets and satellites, now we're looking at exploiting the conditions in space and identifying venues where we can use those conditions and environmental differentiators of sorts to kind of produce better products. So in that line of thinking, it's increasingly becoming more about how do we use microgravity as a condition, or use different radiation that's available there, or vacuum or extreme thermal conditions as a production environment. So taking that conditions and moving beyond just a laboratory and potentially sort of building a factory in space, is becoming sort of the theme that we're seeing in terms of how we innovate in space. So there are many signals. NASA has been one of the pioneers in this space, like in-space production application, INSPA, that as a program NASA has explicitly is targeting products manufactured in space for customers on Earth, right? So that's one of the major themes around which INSPA is now working. And thinking about the direction that we're headed with many space agencies and government-funded programs, curious to know what drew you to the frontier where microgravity becomes a commercial opportunity to be utilized or exploited rather than just a scientific curiosity.
So, so yeah, it is a scientific curiosity. The reality is going, especially if we're talking about microgravity, the microgravity environment that you get when you're in orbit, like on ISS. And for me as a scientist, there is something to that, to see things that I know operate in a way that is unknown to me, right? To do things that are different. But the fact is, because of that different environment and the fact you can get different results, and some of them are, stunningly different, you can use that. That's what it really comes down to. How can you use those outcomes or that environment to get results that you could not get otherwise? And then in some ways that, really that's not enough. You have to be able to then take that and make a commercial product out of it, right? Make a lot of it. I remember having a conversation with one of the previous chief economists at NASA on this topic. And he was like, well, just go make 50 of something for us. And I was like, well, 50 of something? Like, what are you going to make 50 of and make a profit on? So it really made me think about, well, what would you go make? And once you're into that and you look at it in that way, there's a lot of opportunities that come up, things that if you remove the environment of a gravity, the gravity that we all live in, that everything around us is built around, and everything we understand behaves in a way because it's dominated by that force. You remove that force, all of a sudden other forces take over and other things happen. And you just, once you see that, you go, okay, I can use that to, for example, grow crystals that are bigger, because on Earth, they tend to grow to a certain size and fall to the bottom of the flask. But in space, they'll just keep growing. Things don't fall, right? And there's other factors there. On Earth, when you see a fire, we've all seen a fire, it's, different colors up to the top, and then it's hot on top, and it's all the heat is rising off the top and drawing more air in from the bottom. But in space, it doesn't happen like that. Heat doesn't rise, fire doesn't look the same, and a lot of other systems don't behave in the way that we understand on Earth. So you use that. And that's really what I would say is been my focus, is thinking of all these things. Okay, what are all the products that we make on Earth that are defined by gravity, some aspect of them? Gold nanospheres, there's a big market for nanospheres in biotechnology and for other purposes. Objects that are grown in space tend to be perfectly spherical, whereas on the ground, they get to a certain size and become deformed because gravity takes hold and squashes them a little bit. So that was a project that we went after. It's like, can we make perfectly spherical gold nanospheres, and what is the benefit for those? Is it a superior enough benefit that we can compete, even though it will cost more to make them, compete with the terrestrially made product? So that is how we look at it. And yeah, we could go through a bunch of examples of different materials and ultimately different products that could benefit in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's a thing that we're noticing. All the innovations that companies are working around seem to sort of concentrate on certain areas of application. Like we've seen semiconductor manufacturing as one area. How do we make fluids behave differently in space, and that helps to manufacture semiconductors with sort of differentiated capabilities or in different sizes and form factors. And then even in the fiber space, we see capabilities around producing longer fibers. Companies like Flawless Photonics are showing some really good improvements in terms of the length of the fiber that can be manufactured. But there are many experiments, right? So as you pointed out, you've been involved in a few of those, and also from a biotech standpoint, considering that you're with BioOrbit now, what does microgravity really change at a process level, and how that matters to make these products that are differentiated more commercial in terrestrial environment? Yeah.
So for each application, you really have to look at it, in that particular application and what makes sense. I think ultimately down the line, the biggest products that will come from our access to space, let's say in the next 20 or so years, are going to be things related to cellular products, whether that be stem cells or organoids, small clumps of the same types of cells that act as a small liver or some other organ. And those can be used not only as therapies ultimately, but as model systems for other biological systems. It might get us away from using animals as much for testing of new products and what have you. And cells, the way we think of a cell, it's kind of an amorphous but semi-spherical object. But when you look at them under a microscope, they're all been pushed down and flattened down by gravity. When they're in space, they tend to hold their spherical shape. And even the organoids, the clumps of cells, tend to be spherical and not pressed down on the plate. They behave differently. Their shape causes them to behave differently. So there's an example. And you could argue, well, at some point you got to bring them back down. But for some studies, if you can form them in space, if you can generate tissue, for example, at Redwire, they have a 3D printer that prints tissue. So you can print out, a meniscus or some other tissue. You can then take it. You don't have to add extra chemicals or some matrix to hold its shape. You just let it gel in space and firm up and then bring it down, and it will hold its shape. So there are ways you can overcome some of these transitions back. And it's really just what will behave differently. Just like you mentioned, can you make a glass fiber or crystals for the semiconductor industry that are more perfect and bigger, have fewer flaws in them and operate better? And if you make a very large single crystal, you may be able to then cut that up in all the small little wafers to a point where the cost of production, flight and what have you, is not significant as compared to the cost of your ability to profit from that. For me, the one example that really hit home was making crystals in space for like the pharmaceutical industry, and then using them as seeds to grow very large batches terrestrially. So you could make like a thimbleful or less in space, bring it down, and then use that to expand to a very large scale. And what that allows is not only things for the pharmaceutical industry, where you can make a big profit on a small amount of material, relatively speaking, but since the scale doesn't relate to the cost to do it in space anymore, you can do things for the agricultural industry or for cosmetics, for the food industry, foods like ice cream and chocolate. They taste and feel the way they do based on their crystal structure, and that could be modified using seed crystals. So those are the types of things you have to think about. And what you find is it becomes very technical. You need experts in that field who know the challenges and know how to take what is done, let's say in space, bring it back down and fit it into an existing production scheme to make it a commercial product. And I think that's where we're at. We're right on the cusp of that.
Got it. Yeah. It's interesting that we've been from drug development and drug production and seeds that can be scaled up terrestrially for more regulated industry products to ice creams and chocolates with better taste and flavors. So clearly there's quite a few experiments in play, and there are different environmental condition specific properties and other things that can be realized that many companies are working on. But according to you, looking at all these experiments from a sort of a scientific reality perspective, and also looking at how some of these experiments can be transitioned into a scalable manufacturing process. Which product category still sounds slightly crazy for you today, but could, feel obvious by the early 2030s? It's just that it's interesting to know what's somewhat closer in the horizon and more real as compared to what's still going to be a story.
What's way out there? Yeah. I think the first product, I don't have to think. One of the first products that is coming to market based on something that was done in space. You can draw its lineage back to that, although it is not a specific product made in space, is the new version of Keytruda, which is a huge blockbuster. It's got to be Merck's biggest product, probably $20 billion a year in revenue, maybe more. So even if they, as that product has competition with biosimilars, even if your new version only made, 10% of what it made before, $2 billion a year for a product is great, right? Maybe not what Merck would want, but it's still pretty attractive. So I think you're starting to see things like that happen now. We've seen in the past products that were made to assist us in doing work in space, but now you're going to start to see products that are made in space or somehow inspired in space. But I think the breakthroughs are going to be in a mix of the chemistry and the more biological world. Stem cells for model systems or organoids for model systems in the pharmaceutical industry, that will happen. There's a lot of pressures to get away from animal models, not just the ethical side, which is always a concern, but also just from the standpoint of animals are just not always good models for humans. Even monkeys are not little people. They're different metabolism, different behavioral characteristics, just not the same. So if we can go to something that is not just human cells, but it could be your own cells that make up that model. They just take some skin cells, take them to space, reconfigure them as pluripotent stem cells and make a batch of whatever system they're looking at. That could be a really powerful technique that is, I thought was science fiction, and we're already into doing cellular therapy. Even genetic therapies are a reality in our world today. So those are the types of things that I look at. And when I got into this, they were science fiction. They weren't going to happen, and now they're already happening, and their impact is going to be fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. Yeah, just get closer to, realizing what medical science can offer.
Yeah.
Humanity, I guess. Yeah. The other angle that we want to cover is also, as much as science and experiments and the startup ecosystem is really active in building new technologies, progressing science towards proof of concepts. Really, we believe that the ecosystem acceleration is one important element of taking breakthroughs and scaling them into an economy, right? So in that case, in that context, for space, the pieces are slightly different. Like, we need to talk about space logistics, like we discussed earlier. What are the standards for products and processes that are connected in space, and products that are manufactured in space? What kind of financing structures are we looking at? Who are the stakeholders going to be involved? And do we have the right service providers to take care of the equipment and the technology that is around it? And have we got the right infrastructure that can be shared and that helps to compound as we progress? So we believe that there are certain initiatives, like NASA again has something called the In-Space Servicing, Assembly and Manufacturing, ISAM, which is building an ecosystem around in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. So there are multiple entities already, with ISAM, and there are multiple facilities that are being developed to connect these experiments and take them to space and progress science. But we're looking at where we are today, and where you started many years ago. What ecosystem support did you wish existed when you first started, and what has improved since then?
So it's a really good question, because a lot of times we take for granted a lot of the things around us and expect, and then when you go to space, you expect, oh, you're just going to do the same thing, use the same sort of support structure, but it's not the same. In some things, you're going to want to fit into an existing structure like the FDA. If we're talking about pharmaceuticals or therapies, those still have to be approved by the FDA. And the FDA and in Europe, the analogous organizations are already starting to talk about this. How do we adapt to a different environment where maybe we can't send an inspector, or the facility is an autonomous, uncrewed facility that gets put in orbit and is in orbit for a month and then comes back down. So they're starting to think about things like that. The pieces, though, there were a couple of things that were missing when I started, and one of them was you need someone to kind of facilitate the process for you. It's a new process, going to space, and the logistics, the players, the acronyms. NASA's got like 8,500 acronyms, some of which are the same acronym is used for 5 different things. It's contextual, right? And even temporal. Some acronyms were used during Apollo now have a new meaning. So, coming into it, I had no idea. And I was dependent upon other people to explain to me simple things. Like, I was in a meeting, this is one of our first meetings, and somebody asked us what the requirements for our avionics package were. And I remember looking at my colleague, also a chemist, and we had to Google it. What the heck is your avionics package, and what does that have to do with anything? So I think there's a piece of that, and it seems trivial, but it is a critical piece to getting people to adopt this as a standard, right? That they're gonna. So, but everything else, I would say, NASA has done a great job of setting up reliable, consistent systems that you have to kind of plug into, like a USB connection, right? That we're used to, the plug, and we'll see if that carries forward. There's parts of this are privatized. You've got big organizations like SpaceX, which is a dominant force in this. They're very good at what they do. They're coming in and saying, I don't know if I like the standard. I think there might be a better time to go to a better standard. And it's things like that I think the whole economy has to work through as we become a real, our own industry in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. But in today's context, across logistics, standards, financing, in-space power, and the capability to return to Earth, which has all progressed in many ways. Do you see any gaps today that we still need to address in terms of going from now to where we want to be in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, lots of gaps. We are not very good at combining our like the whole data set and building knowledge from that. We're just not good at putting all the pieces together. And it wasn't a primary focus of NASA's efforts, in part. It's not an excuse, right? We should all be doing this, but some of the big breakthroughs I've seen have just been from people going through in the literature and gathering up all the examples for certain situations and doing like trend analysis. I think there's a lot of value there. Standards, you need someone like the Bureau of Standards to step in and assist, but you also need people to develop the analytical tools that will take us from things being qualitative, like this is bigger or that's better, to actual quantitative outcomes that then can be compared directly to what we see terrestrially or to other systems that are executed in space. So it's not just the standards themselves, it's the tools we use to build up our understanding of measures in space. That's been left out. NASA's sent rovers with spectrometers and all these things, but for people doing a lot of the work to build like industrial products on space station, that piece has been missing. And it's not just a gap. I think it's an opportunity. A company that steps up and says, hey, we're going to build analytical tools for station. And then for everything that is done onward, you get into systems for monitoring life support and humans and, human health and what have you. You could own that whole industry onto the future. So those are the things that I look at, return capabilities. SpaceX makes it look really routine. It's not. It's a difficult thing. And if you look at the results from the Starliner first attempt, you see that there's still things we're figuring out. So, but those are from a standpoint of building a space economy, standards, the tools to get that are key. And then bringing it back to the existing systems that we have on Earth that are built for those types of products to make sure that we fit in and we're being safe and making a difference.
Got it. Yeah, so there are gaps, which translates into a massive opportunity, capitalized well, and bringing the right stakeholders together. But in terms of what's happening today, and as with even terrestrial ecosystem, building new technologies and applications with everything to do with AI and quantum, that's really a frontier. We need to understand whether what we're doing today makes sense for what we want to actually achieve in the future. So among all things that we discussed now, and initiatives by space agencies, governments, and the industry as such, what looks like a boring plumbing in this market right now, but is actually where enormous value may accumulate in the future. So it might sound boring today, but that's probably where the money is in the next 4 to 5 years.
Okay, so there's two parts to that. So one is things that enable us to do things in space, and boring like plumbing. Let's talk about plumbing, just like life support, like a toilet, right? You go watch a science fiction movie. I went and saw the new movie with Ryan Gosling, Project Hail Mary. You never see him having to go to the bathroom in microgravity, but if you don't have a working toilet on your space station, that's the end of your mission. It's all done. So and things like that translate back down to Earth. If you come up with a really good system, a toilet that recovers all the, gets rid of things that can't be recovered and used again, but takes all the water out, right? And is really good at doing that and does it safely. That could be something you could end up being a product at Home Depot for parts of, let's say, the United States that don't have a lot of water. So I think there are things like that. At the same time, there are a lot of products that we take for granted that depend upon things that could be made even better in space. And once we get really good at doing things in space and the costs come down a little bit more, we'll start to see those in everyday products, and we won't even know it. You won't even think about it. Just like GPS is a product of our access to space. You get in your car and you're driving around and the map's telling you where you're going. You don't think about not only the fact that you had to put satellites in space, but you had to account for the time differential because they're all moving so quickly that they have to have their own special clock to measure time to be accurate. It's things like that that will pay off for us in ways that we don't understand, we don't recognize, and that are everyday parts of our lives.
Yeah. Ken, I want to go back to something that I think you were articulating a little bit earlier, which is that I think one of the biggest shifts into, space as a bespoke kind of moonshot project to space as an actual economy is a psychological shift. And that there are the right use cases, the right payloads. And when you have those, this looks more like a lot more accessible, right, to a broader swath of enterprises and organizations, and it looks more programmatic. So you can design and integrate, book a ride with SpaceX, fly, iterate. It becomes a process. I'm wondering if a brilliant founder or startup called you tomorrow and wanted to use, let's say, microgravity, and understanding this kind of psychological hurdles that need to be overcome, what would you tell them to validate first before they actually spent real money on this idea?
I would first make sure that whatever they wanted to do couldn't be done on Earth, right? And that there's a real problem there. The second is I would have them connect with someone in a related industry, maybe not exactly the same, but related, and talk about the experience, what you're going to do, how it works, what to expect. And I would take advantage of the fact that right now, the US federal government, through INSPA and access to ISS, has made access really a fairly painless endeavor. I mean, the costs are very low. In some cases, you can get everything paid for. You can get connected to an organization that is a professional group who knows how to design experiments, and they'll work with you directly to make sure that whatever you're trying, whatever study you're trying to interrogate will be done in a way that will give you the results you need. And get you, they'll take care of all the interaction with NASA that needs to happen as far as safety and the administrative part, and they'll help you get it done. And I think the real challenge for a lot of people now is, for me, especially as a scientist, I was used to, if I had an idea, I'd go over to the lab and I'd go run it and I could see it. If it changed color, I could watch it. You've got to be in a different mindset where you're handing it over. It's going to be run in essentially a black box, and you're handing it off, and you don't have the direct interaction. That was one of the things that I really fought for at my previous employer, was put a camera in there or a microscope so I can see what's happening. It was a struggle. Nobody wanted to do it. So difficult. Engineering was so difficult, so costly. And then we did it, and the first images came back live from station, and they couldn't believe it. It's like, well, we got to put this in every box. And then that steps you up to putting in analytical tools. And I think that's what a new person coming in is going to bring, is expertise from their own industry. Well, this is how we do it, and this is why we do it that way. One of the things I learned during my time in industry is that making a single product is a very difficult thing, and it is very specific to that product, especially when you're doing it on scale. And as we go to doing more and more things in space, you're going to see specialization come through in certain aspects of what people do. And there'll be a point where all of a sudden we've crossed that threshold into that thing can actually make what we need it to on scale, that we need it to do in the quality that needs to be done, and is doing it consistently. And then we'll be there. It will be one day we aren't making products and the next we are, and it's because we've brought in people like that. So those are some of the things that I would talk to them about. I think people from other industry have something to teach us as well.
Great. And just to that, maybe we can close out a little bit by thinking about the future a bit more and looking ahead to 2030 and beyond that. Isaac, you talked about ISAM and this imperative to build that kind of industrial backbone for space so that we can continue to scale this economy and really support broadening out manufacturing, logistics, compute at scale is really important here too. When you think about the 2030s, what are you most excited to tell your future self, or what are you most excited about looking forward to that time? 10 years out.
10 years out.
10 years out, yeah.
So some of the things that are starting to bubble up and are going to become real. Yeah, there's investment. You can see there's a lot of investment in launch companies and people who make devices that go into space. But what you're going to start to see is people making investments in organizations that make a product in space and bring it back. And that is the breakthrough. Once that starts to happen and people believe in it in that way, it then opens it up to more and more investment. And as soon as a single product comes back, I think there'll be a gold rush in that area and maybe in other areas. And that's what I'm excited about. That's really why I'm here. I look at being involved, and we're about to go back to the moon and going to Mars. It's great to be a part of, but I'm from industry. I'm not an academic in that way. So I'm looking for, hey, what are the products we can make? And I've seen and gotten feedback on some of the products that I've been directly involved in from experts who have spent their lives studying that and looked at it and said, I've never seen anything like it. It is so different. And it's just a matter of finding those things that are different and the right application, and there'll be products, and we will all benefit from it.
Yeah. And so do you care to place a bet on what you think might be the biggest story by 2030? Do you think it's that helps to scale or grow this economy? Is it going to be manufacturing? Will it be continuation in the growth, or logistics, like the decline of cost? Pharma, biotech, AI, compute nexus. Where do you think the story is going to be?
Yeah, so I don't think costs are going to come down a whole lot. I don't think there's a lot of pressure to make the costs come down, and that even with increased volume, it's going to come down. I think the real breakthrough is going to be in a product. There will be a product. It will most likely, I think, be something based on an architecture that can be made in space in a microgravity environment, whether it be crystal structure or nanostructure. It could be crystals for pharmaceuticals or metal organic frameworks, which are also crystalline. But it will be something in that realm, a sort of more fundamental science solution or product based on a fundamental science property that will become a real product and may make a little bit of money. But at that point, people will see that there's a real future there, and it will be like a gold rush, and people will pile in on it and other things like it. And so that's what I see happening between now and 2030. I'll tell you, it's a fantastic time to be part of the space program because we really have access. There's a lot of great things happening, and I think there's a lot of interest. It's exciting.
Okay, so last thought here. And I know I'm going to switch topics a little bit on you, but this is something that we hear a lot about, which is orbital data centers. Any thoughts on that? Science fiction, long-dated inevitability, distraction, any thoughts around one other area of space economy that is, hyped for growth?
Okay, so they're important money-making ventures that with AI have become even more important, more significant. There is a problem. And even in my own neighborhood here in Indianapolis, we're struggling with it. Someone wants to build a data center upstream from where I live, and they're going to use the water supply to cool that facility. And warm water is, in a way, a pollutant on its own, right? Even if you don't add anything to it, just the change in temperature. So going to space seems like that's a logical thing to do, but you run into some of the same problems, right? You have to manage the heat. Think of a large data center in space. It is like the hot chocolate in a big thermos, and this vacuum of space is the thermos. You've got to offload that heat somehow. And now you don't have water that you can run through it and kick it out the side. You can put, radiators and other devices out there to try to manage the heat, but you still got to manage the heat, and that still adds cost. I think someday, will there be data centers in space? Yeah, there's going to be space platforms and data centers and maybe huge solar collectors that allow us to collect energy and somehow transmit it down to Earth or use it in space. It may be not right now. It's a great thing to talk about, but that wouldn't be my first. There's still challenges to doing that. It's not an easy answer, just put it in space.
Great. Okay, well, that's great. I think maybe we have time there's one question here, or a couple questions here that maybe we can tackle a little bit. So first one, can we conceptually break down the space economy into its location segments in crewed versus uncrewed, and then evaluate each? Or maybe the question is, how should we do this?
Yeah, so you definitely can. And what I would say is everything right now, because we have space station and it's crewed, that's easy. That's like the easiest solution, because you've got a real person there who can check on things or make adjustments, and you can talk to those people. Ultimately, though, for a process that you're doing, an industrial process, you want to keep people out of it, for not just because for safety reasons or what have you, but also cost. Putting people in space is very expensive, relatively speaking. Right now, if you have to pay for astronaut time, it's like $150,000 an hour. That's a pretty good deal if you can get it. So that's part. And then also for a lot of science, you just don't want the variability that you get from having a person interact with it. You want it to be a totally autonomous system. So for now, working out the bugs and trying to figure these things out, having a person in there helping you do it. In some cases, they are skilled scientists and they're very good at it. It's great. But often, if you look at industry in a general sense, you want to lead yourself down the path to having an autonomous system where people aren't in the system, or the system isn't dependent upon them for everyday function.
Great. All right. So I think, we're at a good point of close here. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and end today. I do, Dr. Ken Savin, want to thank you sincerely for coming on and talking with us today. Again, Chief Scientific Officer at BioOrbit. Thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, we've learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did as well. Also, thank you, Isaac Premsingh, Research Director with Everest Group. You always come on and elevate the conversation, so thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing everyone again soon at our next LinkedIn Live. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.